Welcome to the deep dive. So today we're diving straight into something pretty weighty. The 2025 letter to shareholders from JP Morgan Chase.
Right.
Think of this as, your shortcut to understanding how one of the biggest financial players sees the world and their own strategy moving forward.
Yeah, it's a unique window, isn't it?
It really is. Our mission here is to pull out the key insights, what they're thinking about the economy, global politics, their big priorities, the philosophy behind it all.
And it's fascinating because a letter like this gives you that unfiltered view, right? Straight from the top, grappling with all these complex forces. It goes way beyond just the quarterly numbers.
Exactly. And this document, well, it covers a huge range of international crises, specific company stuff. So yeah, let's jump in.
Okay, where do we start?
Let's start with the foundation they lay out. They call them their steadfast principles, 7 core ideas guiding them.
Mm-hmm.
And the very first one, I thought this was interesting, it emphasizes the very real human impact of what they do.
Ah, right. Connecting it back.
Yeah, it's easy to see these giants as just, abstract things, but they point out their stock. It's owned by millions of actual people. Over 100 million in the U.S. Think veterans, teachers, retirees.
That really grounds it, doesn't it? It says, our scale means we have this huge obligation to think about that human element in, well, everything.
It does, and that flows into the second principle, long-term shareholder value. It's tied up with the well-being of customers, employees, communities.
But it's not an either.
Exactly. The idea that, a sustainable business can't really thrive if it ignores those groups.
Precisely. That's a more holistic view of creating value. It's like they're saying the health of their business is totally linked to the health of the whole system they operate in.
Yeah.
Long-term thinking.
And speaking of long-term, the third principle looks at the stock price that way. Not a daily thing, but like a long-run scoreboard.
Yeah.
They point out how they've outperformed the S&P 500 and the financials index since that big 2004 merger. That long view feels pretty central.
It does. The key thing there seems to be focusing on, steady growth from consistent investment and strategy, not just chasing short-term market swings. And they use their history to back that up.
Okay, jumping to the fifth principle, this one caught my eye. They talk about building enduring businesses that help each other, but they're clear. We're not a conglomerate.
Mm-hmm. Interesting distinction.
And then they say they face extraordinary competition. For a company that big, that sounds pretty direct.
It really is. I think the insight there is, even the leaders know they aren't safe from disruption, especially now. Finance is changing so fast, it means they have to keep adapting, keep innovating.
Makes sense. Then the sixth principle, being a source of strength in tough times. For clients, but also for the whole global financial system.
Yeah, that feels especially relevant with all the uncertainty we talk about later. Right?
Definitely.
That systemic importance, it's a huge weight. The idea is they're committed to being stable, reliable, especially when things get rocky. They seem to take that role very seriously.
And wrapping up the principles, number 7 highlights their partnership with the U.S. government. They even quote Warren Buffett on it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And they make a point about paying their fair share of taxes. The numbers are staggering, over $52 billion in U.S. taxes in the last decade. Plus, billions more internationally and to the FDIC.
Wow. That's a massive contribution.
Huge.
It really underscores their role, as a major player in the economic health of the countries where they operate. Their success in the broader society, they're linked.
Okay, so those are the guiding principles. Then the letter kind of pivots. It moves to this section called Critical Crossroads, America and the World.
Right, and this is where the tone gets pretty serious.
Yeah, stark is the word I'd use. They describe the global situation as the most perilous and complicated since World War II. They list Ukraine, the Middle East, China's rise, potential splits in Europe. It's a sobering outlook.
It really is. The big picture they're painting is one of much greater instability, more interconnection than we've seen in a long, long time. It forces them, and us really, to rethink risk opportunity.
And they make this explicit link between security and economics, saying economic warfare has caused military warfare in the past. That's a heavy statement.
It is, and it sets up their argument for why certain national actions are needed.
Right. They lay out 5 key actions for the nation. First, they say celebrate American values and virtues, but with humility.
So, national unity, shared purpose, but keeping it realistic maybe, not being overly triumphalist.
Seems like it. Second, acknowledge and fix domestic problems. Needs common sense, resolve. This comes up again and again.
That makes sense. You have to get your own house in order to deal with external threats effectively, right? That's the stage for the policy stuff.
Third point, implement effective domestic policies for robust economic growth, but for all citizens. Ties back to that stakeholder idea.
Yeah, growth that's broad-based, inclusive. They see that as the foundation for national strength, for dealing with everything else.
Fourth, national security and a strong military are paramount. Unsurprising, given their view of the world right now.
In a riskier world, yeah, defense becomes critical. It's about protecting interests, but also contributing to stability. It's their source of strength idea, just on a national scale.
And the fifth action, promote healthy economic alliances, but with fair trade. So collaboration, but making sure it works for everyone involved.
Right. Strong partnerships are good for prosperity and security, but that fair trade bit suggests they want deals that are genuinely balanced and stable.
Okay, so this naturally leads into their detailed discussion on domestic policy priorities. And they list quite a few things causing frustration.
Yeah, they don't hold back here.
First up is the lack of border control. They call for reform, specifically merit-based immigration, and interestingly, letting foreign graduates stay here.
Immigration's always complex, huge economic piece. Their take seems to be secure the border first, then reform to bring in skilled people who can contribute.
They also hit ineffective and incompetent government. They talk bureaucracy, permit delays, problems in education.
Right, the whole inefficiency drag on the economy, on society.
And they mention the lack of real-world experience among many career politicians as maybe part of that.
Yeah, that's a common critique, isn't it? That disconnect between policymaking and practical reality.
They also make this interesting point about government being both too weak and too strong.
How so?
Like struggling with basic tasks, but also overreaching in ways that curb freedom, even trying to influence thoughts and feelings, they suggest.
Ah, okay. So that tension between needing effective government and protecting individual liberty. Where's the right balance, basically?
The letter also brings up culture wars and virtue signaling. They seem worried that some cultural debates and policies have actually been divisive, maybe even hurt the people they were meant to help.
Their perspective sounds like a call for maybe more pragmatism, focusing on core values and practical solutions instead of, performative politics.
Then healthcare, the imperfect healthcare system. They acknowledge the good parts, but hammer the high costs, the lack of transparency, not enough preventive care, the uninsured.
Yeah, the U.S. healthcare paradox. Spending so much, but average outcomes aren't always great. Reform is definitely needed. That's a broad consensus.
They also flag damaging trade practices, especially with China. Two things here. Not enough help for people hurt by trade shifts and letting the U.S. get too dependent on adversaries for critical stuff.
Right. Trade's good overall, they'd probably say, but you have to manage the downsides, the job losses, and you really have to think about national security risks in supply chains. Strategic thinking needed.
And the last domestic problem they list, selfishness. They call for putting national interest above special interests, whether it's unions looking for specific perks or businesses doing the same.
Yeah, the lobbying, the vested interest.
Yeah.
It's a constant battle in policymaking, isn't it?
Yeah.
Their point is about needing that bigger picture view.
So after outlining all these problems, they stress the need for policy that's detailed, comprehensive, and coordinated, not piecemeal stuff.
Makes sense. You need a holistic approach.
They also briefly touch on the different economic philosophies. They note frustrations in the business world with some recent democratic policies, seeing them as maybe too simplistic, using price gouging accusations, or relying on what they call ineffective virtue signaling.
Okay.
While Republicans are generally seen as more pro-business, less interventionist.
So just highlighting that ongoing debate about the best way to manage the economy and the difficulty in finding common ground for those comprehensive solutions.
A really big part of this section is competing with China. Needs robust economic policy, Western unity. They acknowledge China's huge growth, but also its current struggles, real estate, finance, demographics.
Right. China competition is clearly a central theme. And their answer is a coordinated Western economic strategy, strong alliances to stay ahead.
And trade alliances are key there. They point out the U.S. is kind of lagging. The EU has tons of agreements, China is making deals, but the U.S. is missing agreements with some key allies.
That's a significant point about maintaining influence and market access.
On industrial policy, how government can boost industries, they lean towards targeted tax credits, market-based stuff, not direct government control picking winners and losers.
Okay, so using the tax code strategically, letting the market mostly allocate capital.
Yeah. And they do acknowledge jobs lost to trade, suggesting a beefed-up trade adjustment assistance program.
So recognizing the social cost and trying to mitigate it.
They also clarified trade deficits not automatically bad can mean the U.S. is attractive for investment, but deficits just for consumption, that might be worrying.
Nuance there. Depends why the deficit exists.
And they really trumpet America's energy self-sufficiency. Huge competitive advantage, geopolitical plus. They do criticize past policy mistakes, though, like blocking pipelines.
Right, leveraging those natural resources is key. And the point about affordable, reliable energy globally is important too.
The letter quickly covers some other foreign economic points, too. Taxes need to be internationally competitive, support U.S. businesses operating overseas, fix the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act.
Seems like practical things to boost U.S. global economic power.
And keep the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency. They say that saves the U.S. around $100 billion a year.
Wow. That's a huge benefit, directly linked to having strong economic and military alliances, right? It all ties together.
Okay, shifting gears slightly to national security, they just hammer home again. It's vital for peace. Ukraine, Middle East, these are battlefields of freedom, they say.
Strong language.
And they have specific policy ideas. Multi-year funding for the military could save $40 billion, they estimate. Addressing labor shortages for making military gear takes years to train people, apparently.
Practical bottlenecks.
Securing supply chains away from adversaries, rare earths, penicillin, semiconductors are examples. Targeted tech investments and export controls. Using national labs, universities.
So a real focus on the industrial base, the supply chains, the tech edge. It's not just about buying more tanks.
Exactly. And bringing allies along, supporting their capabilities, including making sure they have energy security, too.
Cooperation is key.
Next section. Critical domestic policies for growth. They really push for consistent, responsible fiscal policy. They even suggest a bipartisan thing like Sweden has, tied to debt to GDP and getting rid of the debt ceiling drama.
Interesting. A structural fix for fiscal responsibility.
Yeah.
And differentiating investment from spending in government books.
Yeah, they argue things like infrastructure should be accounted for differently than regular expenses. And they note the U.S. spends less on infrastructure than other developed countries and China.
Seems like common sense accounting, right? Treat long-term assets differently.
They also criticize how the government accounts for loans, using the student loan program as a prime example of, well, mismanagement and big losses because of bad underwriting.
Oof. Yeah, that's been a huge issue.
And they raise flags about the government controlling Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, too. Risks there.
Right, the potential for moral hazard or inefficient management when government runs entities like that.
Then taxes again. For a growth-focused system, they want it neutral across industries, stable, competitive globally, and incentivizing innovation.
The ideal wish list for a tax system, basically.
They actually praise the 2017 tax cuts, broader base, lower corporate rate, better international rules, and link it to rises in real income and investment.
Okay, so they see that as a positive step.
But they suggest more tweaks for growth and fairness, like nearly doubling the earned income tax credit, the EITC, and maybe even removing the requirement that you need kids to get it.
So boosting incomes for lower wage workers directly. That's a significant proposal.
Education reform gets a lot of attention. High dropout rates, especially inner cities. They argue for redirecting existing money to things that work better, like effective workforce training. They cite aviation high school as an example.
Focusing on outcomes, practical skills.
They want Pell Grants usable for work credential programs, not just traditional degrees. Reauthorize the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act for second chance initiatives for people maybe needing retraining or coming from difficult backgrounds.
So making education much more flexible and tied to actual job market needs.
And higher ed. They say it costs too much, isn't linked enough to outcomes, maybe tie funding to graduate income levels, reform the whole federal student loan system.
Big changes proposed there.
And they stress early childhood education, too. Critical foundation.
Absolutely essential, yeah.
Back to healthcare one more time. Need to cut costs, improve outcomes. Simple fixes proposed. Better data collection, letting individuals own their health data, way more transparency on costs, national exchanges for insurance.
These sound like steps towards empowering patients and fostering competition.
Better standards across programs, getting employees engaged in health literacy, tackling medical bankruptcy. Eventually, they suggest moving towards individuals being responsible for buying their own health care, maybe with long-term buy options.
A shift towards more individual responsibility over time. And they connect citizen health directly to productivity growth.
Makes sense. Healthy workforce is a productive workforce.
Right.
Then, regulations. Improve the good ones, cut the crippling bureaucracy. They estimate the cost of regs at over $3 trillion a year.
Wow. That's a number.
Permitting timelines are a key example of the delays and inefficiency. Regulations need constant improvement, they argue.
An ongoing process, not set it and forget it.
And supporting small business is vital. They create 2/3 of new jobs. It needs public-private partnerships for capital, links with trade schools for talent, better healthcare options, predictable taxes, less red tape locally.
A whole ecosystem of support for small business. Good local zoning for affordable housing is mentioned too. Right, connects to talent attraction. Then, strengthening the financial system itself. They argue regulations may be overreacted after the '08 crisis, even though capital levels are way up.
Interesting point, finding that balance.
They want a more dynamic regulatory structure, one that allows for growth and innovation. They criticize the complexity of the CCR stress tests, how treasury bonds are treated in certain ratios.
Getting into the weeds of financial regulation there.
Basically, they advocate for simplifying rules, reevaluating based on cost-benefit, thinking about unintended consequences like the growth of non-bank lenders. They want more credit available, better banking access for more people.
So a call for smarter, maybe leaner regulation that doesn't stifle responsible lending and innovation.
They also talk about improving public markets, making it easier and cheaper for companies to go public. Less cost, better tax policies, flexible listing rules, less litigation risk.
Trying to revitalize the IPO market.
And they mention successful retirement savings systems elsewhere, like Australia and Sweden, with investment savings accounts. Maybe lessons there for the U.S.
Looking internationally for models.
Finally, in this section, they praise local democracy. Smaller cities, towns, where collaboration actually solves local problems. Lessons to be learned there.
Grassroots effectiveness, yeah.
Okay, now shifting to specific issues facing our company. First, what to do with their excess capital. They say $30 to $60 billion.
That's a lot of excess capital.
It is. Priority 1, organic growth. 2, acquisitions, but they say large ones are unlikely now. 3, stock buybacks, but only at prudent levels.
So growth first, then deals, then buybacks.
But right now, they're holding on to extra capital because of all the global risks they've been talking about. Makes sense.
Caution in uncertain times.
Their big focus is driving that organic growth everywhere, all business lines, globally new branches in Africa, for instance, pushing into affluent clients, payments, development finance, private credit, the whole innovation economy.
Ambitious growth plans.
But they know competition will be fierce from old rivals and fintechs.
Absolutely. No easy wins there.
And they repeat. Geopolitical risk is the biggest one. Cyber attacks, war, energy shocks, global threats. They analyze direct impacts, secondary, tertiary, and see their role as being that source of strength through it all.
Back to that core principle again. Stability provider.
Next section has a great title. We're not in Kansas anymore. Economy, inflation, interest rates, asset prices, trade wars.
Catchy. Sets the tone.
They talk about the huge impact of all that deficit spending and quantitative easing QE since COVID. Strong growth, yeah, but also inflation, higher profits. But they stress the U.S. deficit and debt to GDP, unsustainably high. And it's a global issue, too.
They hang over from all that stimulus.
Yeah.
Significant long-term concerns about debt.
They touch on tariffs, trade barriers, VATs, complex stuff could impact alliances.
Trade frictions are definitely part of this new landscape.
And the effects of quantitative tightening, QT, the opposite of QE, largely unknown, they say, likely to cause more volatility in treasury markets.
Right, we're in uncharted territory, pulling all that liquidity back out.
And they expect inflation pressures to stick around. Why? High deficits, global remilitarization, infrastructure spending, supply chains restructuring. Lots of drivers.
So not expecting inflation to just vanish quickly.
Interest rates. Depends on inflation, U.S. economic strength, what people expect the dollar to do, supply and demand for treasuries. Lots of factors.
Very complex picture for rates.
Bottom line for this section, huge uncertainty. A wide range of outcomes is possible, different rates. Asset prices moving around, depends on inflation, recession, trade talks, geopolitics. But they stress the company is prepared for different scenarios.
Planning for volatility, basically.
Okay, quick bit on consumer payments. They actually break down the cost of a checking account about $225 a year. $150 of that is fixed cost.
Interesting transparency.
And fraud, big issue. Over $500 million in losses for them last year alone. But their detection efforts apparently prevented $12 billion in losses for customers.
Wow. Shows the scale of the fraud problem and the investment needed to fight it.
And there's this brewing fight over third-party access to bank customer data. Fintechs wanting access.
The open banking debate.
JP Morgan's stance: customer has to authorize it. Banks should be fairly compensated for providing access. Restrictions on how the third party uses the data, and the third party needs to be liable if something goes wrong.
Seems like sensible safeguards, right? Protecting customer data while allowing for innovation.
Then, strategic intelligence. They spend over $1 billion a year on research and analysis. Over 700 senior analysts covering thousands of companies, dozens of countries.
Huge investment in understanding the world.
They launched a new JP Morgan Chase Center for Geopolitics.
Formalizing that focus on global risk.
And Morgan Health, their healthcare arm, is trying to improve employer-sponsored healthcare. They've invested $217 million in 9 companies working on different health solutions.
Actively trying to innovate in healthcare, not just finance it.
They also mentioned their localized investment model started in Detroit, now applying it elsewhere globally. And they highlight their support for growth in Texas, specifically government, universities, energy, small business, consumers. Lots of partnerships.
So tailoring investments to specific regional needs and opportunities.
Okay, finally we get to management learnings. This is like Dimon sharing his management playbook. Really interesting stuff.
Yeah, the practical advice.
Big themes. Avoid complacency, arrogance, bureaucracy, and BS, his word. Focus on efficiency, do more with less, a 10% efficiency target. Speed is crucial, adapt or die, basically. He lists companies that failed: Sears, Kmart, BlackBerry, and financial firms too.
Stark warnings about staying agile.
Get the numbers right, understand them deeply, constant investment through the cycle, don't pull back just because times are tough.
Discipline and long-term vision again.
Always assess competition, customers, employees. Get out of your own echo chamber. Learn from others. He mentions Chick-fil-A.
Looking outside finance for best practices.
Relentlessly kill bureaucracy. He talks about a store support center mindset, not headquarters dictating. Address customer complaints directly. Eliminate useless stuff like black car services, excessive mailings, questioning things like having 500 management coaches, streamlining meetings.
Very focused on cutting waste and empowering the front lines. Practical examples.
He shares personal mistakes, too. Underestimating the cloud, keeping the wrong people too long, missing risk signs, the London whale incident, a bank one branch hours issue. The point is to acknowledge mistakes and learn.
That takes humility, especially at that level. Builds credibility.
Culture, he says, is created by actions, not words. Foster an environment for people who are curious, honest, hardworking, empathetic, fire bad clients, recognize good work, the bank's purpose, lifting up society. He even tells a story about reversing the outsourcing of security guards to bring them back in-house.
That's a powerful statement about valuing people and the kind of culture you want. Actions speak louder.
Leading the team. Regular reviews. Put dead cats on the table. Address problems openly. Focus on negatives to improve. Foster collaboration, share facts, value disagreement, earn loyalty by listening, avoid the stay-in-your-lane mentality.
Sounds like a very demanding but open leadership style.
And tackle tough transformations like mergers and system integrations head-on.
Necessary, but painful sometimes.
And some practical tips. Write memos yourself, communicate directly, share all the facts, use follow-up lists, avoid jargon, make meetings count, pre-reads, full attention, do a press release exercise to clarify outcomes. Work smarter, not longer. Make work fun. Take care of yourself.
Gold nuggets of practical advice there.
And always ask your team, what would you do if you were queen or king for a day? To get honest feedback and ideas.
Love that. Empowering question.
So wrapping this all up, after digging through this whole letter, you really do get a very comprehensive picture, don't you? How a major player like JP Morgan Chase sees the world, their strategy.
Absolutely. The emphasis on geopolitical risk, how it connects to everything else, that really stands out.
Yeah, and the level of detail on U.S. domestic policy, it shows how much they think the external environment matters for their own success and the country's.
Right, and then grounding it all in those management principles that focus on execution, culture, avoiding complacency. It's a reminder that strategy is one thing, but making it happen day to day is crucial.
It really is. You see the macro view and the micro view working together.
It paints a picture of needing to be incredibly vigilant about global trends, but also relentlessly focused on just running the business well, efficiently, ethically.
So thinking about all these interconnected pieces, the geopolitics, the economy, domestic policy, how they run the company, It leaves you with a big question, doesn't it? Like, what single area, if you had to pick one, is going to have the biggest impact over the next, say, 10 years, and why?
That's a tough one. So many critical factors interacting. Geopolitics feels huge right now, but domestic policy enables or disables response. Technology disruption is woven through it all, too.
Exactly. It's definitely something for you, the listener, to chew on. Which thread pulls the hardest?
So,
Worth think about. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive today.
yeah, fascinating stuff.